Please welcome to the stage Nicholas Thompson, CEO at The Atlantic.
Hello, everybody. I'm Nicholas Thompson. I'm CEO of The Atlantic. Thank you for coming here. Thank you for being part of the festival. And thank you for coming for what is going to be an awesome conversation about AI and mental health. I want you all to tweet about it, Instagram about it. I also want you to silence your cell phones if you can. And I want to thank Leaps by Bear for presenting this, for supporting this, and for bringing us together today. And I want to introduce Karen Riegel from Leaps. She's the Deputy Director of Brand and Community Engagement. Karen, please come on stage and tell everybody what we are up to.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here and represent the Leaps by Bayer team and vision. Leaps invests in teams pursuing fundamental breakthroughs in the areas of health and nutrition, targeting 10 huge leaps facing humanity, challenges. Leap number 5 is to protect brain and mind. Neurological diseases and mental health disorders represent a massive and growing unmet need. We've invested in several companies working in the space, from cell therapies that aim to restore motor neurons to a microbiome therapeutic that could change the way we treat epilepsy, to an AI-powered tool from Wobot Health that aims to scale access to mental health support. In fact, Wobot's thoughtful approach to balancing exponential advances in AI with clinically validated models inspired today's discussion. Many of our company portfolios are leveraging AI together with other technologies, and we're deeply optimistic that this will accelerate breakthroughs, making it possible to cure rather than just treat disease, sustainably feed a global population. But such transformative potential also bears great risk, which is why conversations like these are so critical. The conviction is at the heart of our Leaps Talk series, and we're thrilled to partner with The Atlantic on this one. This is our 11th Leaps Talk. We've partnered with South by Southwest, Summit LA, MIT Tech Review, and others. A massive thanks to the whole team at The Atlantic behind this, to three truly inspiring speakers, and to all of you for joining us to explore the intersection between AI and mental health. Thank you.
And now, here to discuss Mind to Machine, please welcome Mustafa Suleyman, co-founder and CEO of Inflection AI and author of The Coming Wave, and Karlie Kloss, supermodel, entrepreneur, and philanthropist, with, back again, Nicholas Thompson.
All right. What a great panel I've got here. So this is Mustafa's new book. It's amazing. It's wonderful. I read it straight through in one sitting. You should all read it. It's fantastic. We're going to talk about it a lot. So that's Mustafa. And this is Karlie, who you probably know. And I think it's possible that I am the only magazine editor in America who has been in publications that have written about her multiple times but never photographed her. So it's 2-0. Because, and this is what we're going to talk about today, she does really incredible work with Code with Kloss. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how it's developing. We're going to talk about where AI is going. And most importantly, we're going to talk about how AI can change mental health. For good, for ill. We're going to talk about some of the big issues surrounding it. Ideally, when you leave the stage, you will have thought of some things you haven't thought of before. Certainly that is my goal. So, Karlie, let's begin with you. It was a long time ago you started Code with Kloss. Tell everybody who doesn't know what it does and how you started it.
Sure. Thank you for having me, and I'm truly honored to be on this stage among you both. So I started Code with Kloss 8 years ago out of just my own sheer curiosity of what was happening in the world. And I had worked in fashion since I was 15 years old, and that creative thread of fashion is interwoven into so many other industries, including technology. So I found myself as a early 20 model meeting so many founders of tech companies. And I was simultaneously in an industry like fashion that was being transformed by social media. And so all of a sudden, I, as a model who's been historically seen and not heard, had a platform to speak about anything, and show the world who I authentically am. And it was this really interesting moment just in my youth and in my life of realizing, oh wow, there's so much more that I want to say, but also who is behind these big tech companies? And when I started to realize that it's people behind these big tech companies, and these people know a specific skill of coding, it really clicked for me of, oh wow, what is that language that a tech founder may have been exposed to as a young person to lead them to be able to build an idea that can build a big business? And why was I never exposed to that? And so I all of a sudden kind of had this platform and this voice to particularly young women, and I wanted to point them in a direction that was more meaningful than just selling them a handbag, and also more authentic to me. And so I myself went to go learn how to code, just even basic high-level understanding of front-end, back-end, hardware, software, like how it all works. And it really humanized for me that it's not this big scary thing that only the most intellectual people in the world know. It's a language. It's a language in which we communicate with computers. And that became very simple to me as to, oh wow, I, as somebody who's worked in fashion, can identify so many problems that could be solved for and innovated with technology. And imagine if more people with all sorts of life experiences were equipped with these skills, what kind of problems would they identify? What would they solve for? And so it kind of all, certainly I did not anticipate starting an education nonprofit that has scaled now to where we are today, and I'm so proud of it. It started with 21 scholarships that I underwrote myself, and I put it out on my social media, and we had thousands of applicants for those 21 spots. And I realized, wow, there's a lot of young women who want to learn these skills. So over the past 8 years, we now build curriculum, train teachers, and run summer camps both in person and virtual classrooms around the world. So we've had 10,000 young women and gender-expansive teens in our classrooms.
And there's still a huge gender divide in the percentage of people who go into coding, who go into engineering, who go into AI. Are you seeing it shrink? And if so, what's the most important factor in making it shrink?
I mean, I think that's a question for people in the industry as well, but what we're seeing that's changed a lot over the past decade is that more and more young women are coming to Code with Kloss and have been exposed to some level of coding before. And that's exciting because to me that means that we're making progress in making it more accessible in public schools and not just expensive coding boot camps. Everything we run, by the way, is for free. So we really try and eliminate these barriers to entry. But what I am seeing is, you know, so they're more exposed to kind of these skills, but as we're going to talk about, the language and what it means to code and the tools is evolving by the day. So.
All right. Well, Mustafa, you did not get into coding from Code with Kloss. I believe you had a different route.
Not yet.
Can I tell you one thing?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'll let you. Please.
No.
I have an interesting story I'll tell you. One of our scholars is actually working for you in London.
Oh, no way.
And I only found out about that on the train yesterday. I took the train from New York, and this girl I was sitting next to told me my little sister coded with Code with Kloss in 2014, and then she went on to get a full ride at Yale, studying computer science. She's a software engineer at DeepMind in London.
Wow, that's incredible.
Crazy.
That had to be a plant. Like, how did that person get on the train? But I didn't do it, so who did it?
It might be a simulation, is maybe my...
We're going to get to that. Yeah.
Crazy.
All right, Mustafa, so how did you get into engineering? And then also tell the story of how you got into mental health work, which is extremely interesting.
Well, I dropped out of Oxford when I was 19 in order to start, or help to start, a telephone counseling service. And I worked for pretty much 3 years with no salary in our nonprofit. It was called Muslim Youth Helpline. And it was a telephone counseling service for young British Muslims. And the basic idea was that, you know, there are a set of tools, non-judgmental, non-directional listening that can be, used to train people to be supportive and kind and respectful. And we were very adamant that this should be a non-religious service, a support service. I was actually an atheist, even though I started the charity for essentially Muslims. But the focus was on trying to take tools which already exist and repurpose them in a faith and culturally sensitive way to make people feel, understood and recognized specifically by their peers. So, there were lots of sort of adults, if you like, at the time who were providing more directional, services that ended up being kind of laced with religiosity and actually had a kind of undertow of judgment around sexuality or judgment about promiscuity outside of marriage, or what kind of things you do for your work in the future, and so on. And we just kind of wanted to reject a lot of that and just create an environment where people could feel, young British Muslims could explore their own religiosity if they wanted to. Like, we were also not judgmental of their religion if they chose to believe, but fundamentally gave a place where they could actually come to terms with, or come to explore their own, sort of gender, sexuality, race, religion. And this was just shortly after 9/11. So there was a lot of there was this sort of moment of sort of backlash and kind of pressure of Islamophobia and forcing people to sort of choose whether you're British or are you Muslim or are you from your home country, and like trying to step beyond all of that and just create an environment that was accepting and supportive. And 20 years later, the charity is still running and abides by the same principles. It's actually one of the few support services in the UK where Sunnis and Shias and Christians and people of no faith whatsoever are working together, to try and provide, very basic infrastructure of support and listening.
All right, so then let's jump ahead in the story. Let's skip the part where you go into AI, you form the most important AI company in the world, it gets acquired by Google for billions of dollars, you then set off a global Cold War in AI competition after you win a go. Then you leave the company, there's an internal dispute over Google, they try to figure it out, they then try to catch up to OpenAI, it all kind of gets lost, you all start your new company, then you have inflection, and boom, presto, here we are. Now.
That's a pretty good summary.
So here we are, and let's talk about Pi, and let's talk about what Pi is and how it could possibly be helpful for mental health.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're on the cusp of a completely new moment in the history of technology. Just as when people first invented mainframe computers, the reaction was to have a personal computer, the PC. In this moment, we have these huge foundation models, these massive centralized intelligences, and in the next wave, everybody is going to have their own personal intelligence. Ours is called Pi. And essentially, we have initially designed it as a companion. It's a friend, it is kind and supportive, it's very respectful, it's very boundaried, it's aware that it's an AI, it doesn't try to imitate being a human, it doesn't try to supplant a human relationship, but it does have high EQ. And so where ChatGPT demonstrated that these models can produce high IQ, they can be very factual and they can give you a long list and sort of regurgitate, Wikipedia and, be very, very productive and useful. We wanted to demonstrate that we could create an AI experience that was very fluid and smooth and conversational, that listened very closely to what you had said, framed it back to you, helped you to manage, sort of problems that you're facing in your day, helps you to vent, helps you to give up smoking, to lose weight, whatever your goal is, in a conversational and supportive way. There is now an AI Pi to support that. And I think that what has been slightly lost in the amazing sort of progress we've made on rights in the last few decades is the importance of kindness and the social privilege that comes with having high EQ, right? We're very familiar with the value and the structural advantage, the privilege that is, incurred by having like a, certain race or a certain religion or a certain sexuality. We're very familiar with that language. But actually just wherever your background, having a supportive family infrastructure or having a supportive parent or sibling or best friend is actually a real turbo boost and can make a massive difference when you're making important decisions in your life about what to study or where to live or which job to go for. And now, over the next few years, that kind of kindness and empathy and support is going to become a universally available commodity to everybody, not just IQ, but also the EQ side of it. And it's going to fundamentally transform, the opportunities that everybody has to have that in your pocket.
All right, so Karlie, the people if you look at mental health statistics, the cohort that has, declined the most since the creation of the internet, and particularly the creation of social media, is young women. Right? And if you look at mental health outcomes and depression and risk of suicide, and you look at the cohort and you look at it basically since we get mobile phones and we get, Instagram, Facebook, and all that, has been in decline. Do you think that this next generation of technology, where we have personal assistants and all else that will come in the next 3 weeks or whenever the stuff comes,
hour by hour,
hour by hour, may already have been out since the time we went in the green room.
Exactly.
GPT-5 actually came out while we were there. Are you optimistic that this next generation of tech will be helpful, or are you concerned, or both?
Yeah, I speak on behalf of my community of scholars as well, who are this next generation of workforce. And they are cautiously optimistic, I would say. They are aware that, one, they need to have a seat at the table, both in informing how this technology is built, and everyone needs to have a basic literacy of how it's built and why it matters that there's diversity of lived experience a part of creating that technology. I think, I was speaking to a scholar just this week, and she was, they went through a really intense last few years in the pandemic. Being a teenage girl, I think any period throughout history is not always fun, but I think it was only intensified. The isolation and just so many factors of that. Part of what we do at Code with Kloss is beyond just be an entry point into learn the skills, but really the community around our scholars as well, who are often the only ones who look like them or have identities that they're bringing to a comp sci classroom. And so I think it's so important to really equip them with beyond just the skills, but also I think they're aware of both the power of these tools to be used for extreme positive impact, and they also just want to make sure they're informed by people like them.
And how concerned are you that all the major AI companies are run by men? Probably half of them are run by men who dropped out of Stanford?
So far. I think that's, let's see, my scholars are going to change that. And I think that's part of why this conversation matters. And I don't disagree, and I think I'm so grateful we have someone like Mustafa who's really leading this conversation and bringing humanity and making sure that we're thinking about how we're building this technology with all sorts of diverse perspectives. But it's true, the status quo today is that 25% of the workforce in the tech industry today are women. And that's come a long way. It's better than other countries, but we need to have diversity of lived experience building this.
Well, and on machine learning, it's even lower. It's about 12%. So as a subset of software in general, it's tiny. And partly that's a structural effect, like fewer women go into not just computer science, but the specialist areas of AI and machine learning. And so it takes a long time for that to kind of filter through. I mean, at DeepMind, we started the first program to focus specifically on hiring young women at the Grace Hopper conference, which I think started in 2015 and we joined in 2016. And that was one of the first places where young women who didn't have a computer science background, but maybe had an engineering or maths or any other background could come to the conference, meet fellow mentors and peers. There's a tiny group of people at the time, and just get connected. Because a big part of it is mentorship and just believing that it is possible and knowing how to navigate a way in.
And seeing and knowing what could be possible. And I think that's part of why Code with Kloss exists and we're living in a time where those barriers to entry still exist in the fact that you need access to equipment and basic skills and a community. But what's happening in AI is democratizing entry level. You don't need to necessarily be proficient in coding to build something with AI. And I think that's really compelling and also even more important that we have everybody a part of this conversation and accessing these tools.
So let's stay on this, right? It's one thing we know from the last 15 years of tech is that when you have a biased group of people making decisions, you end up with outcomes that follow those biases. So Mustafa, you're building this AI assistant, this AI helpline. It's going to be great when I'm railing about my OKRs, right? It's been trained by people who are into that. How have you set it up so that it's trained to respond equally well to people of different backgrounds, different ages, different needs, different education levels? What did you do? Also, other problem, it's almost by definition been trained on the internet as it exists, which has biases baked into it. What did you do?
So training on the internet is firstly a good thing because it needs to see all of the hideous content that we've produced, the armpit of the world, in order to know what not to produce, right? So that's the first thing to address. It's good. The second stage of training after the pre-training period is this alignment, or some people call it fine-tuning. And in that moment, you basically want to represent examples, side-by-side comparisons of good and bad behavior. What is a good response in a given context, and what is a really bad one? So who designs those responses is really critical. And that means question of representation, question of expertise, like are people qualified to be able to say, this is a sensitive and respectful way of responding to somebody who is feeling anxious or potentially suicidal or, or depressed in some way. And that, at the moment, is a closed source, private exercise. That happens behind closed doors. We're a company, we're a public benefit corporation, but we're fundamentally a company. And so that's kind of an area where I think there's opportunity for change, like who gets access to that process. The other thing I would say is, the remarkable thing about what we've seen over the last 3 years is that as the models get larger, they get easier to control, which reduces the barrier to entry to being able to influence them, right? So you actually don't need to be technical, just as Karlie said, you don't need to be technical to shape the behaviors and values of a specific instance of the model. Some of you will have seen that Meta released their new sort of millions of AIs framing of how this unfolds yesterday. Now, in the next few months, everybody is going to get access to be able to shape an AI that reflects their values. And so we should assume that we actually reduce the hallucinations problem, this issue where it generates things that are incorrect or false in some way, and we really largely eliminate the bias question as well in the next few years. I think that's a better framing. Imagine that gets solved, and then deal with the consequences of that being largely solved, in the sense that it will be very controllable and very responsive to your behavior. If you try Pi today, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to cause it to say something which is in any way homophobic, judgmental, racist. It doesn't engage in any conspiracy theories. None of the prompt hacks work. None of the prompt injection hacks work. And this is, it's out in the world. Try it. If you get it, then tag me on Twitter, show me up, call me out. It really doesn't, right? It really doesn't. And that shows that if you're very intentional and very deliberate and start from first principles in trying to create a very boundaried and safe AI, it is possible. The flip side is, everyone else is going to create one of those, and it'll reflect different people's values in the world, which is a good thing.
And okay, let's go back, because you said 17 interesting things in that response. You actually believe that hallucinations are going to go away? I've seen you arguing about this on Twitter, and you do not have universal agreement from my feed.
Yeah, which is a good thing. I mean, it's a research question, and so there are definitely differences of opinion. But consider that GPT-2, so each version of these models is 10x larger than the previous one in computation. So it's not just an incremental gain, it's an exponential gain. And more computation means more opportunities for the model to experience all the training data and to observe more of the subtle relationships between underlying training data elements and other bits of training data. So it can it can pay attention to a much more distant and sort of profused set of relations, which actually is what makes it more controllable and precise, which is why hallucinations will go down. So GPT-2 was basically incoherent. It was like unusable. Most of it just didn't make any sense. 100x later, when we move through GPT-3, GPT-4, you can see the results, right? As we go to 5 and 6, and by the way, the numbers are we're all training at the same rate. We call them different things, but we're all at the same compute class. And we will finish our GPT 4.5 in January, so it'll be 5 times larger than GPT-4 in terms of compute. And we expect it to be much, much better on factual accuracy. But when we 100x it over GPT-4, I think it's going to be largely eliminated. That's the claim that I've made on Twitter, and I've been saying publicly, largely eliminated.
And you have $10,000 riding on this or something based on my feed? I can't quite remember what the bet was.
$1.5 billion if you think about it.
I guess it's true based on the investment,
And the integrity of humanity.
Yeah, that's true too. So Karlie, okay, so let's say this is true. Hallucinations go down, everything gets better. Would you want your kid at age 16 to be getting mental health advice from a bot?
Well, I think the reality is that mental health resources are a privilege for a lot of people to have funds to pay someone to even have equipment to access, information on the internet. So I do think there is something that I feel very hopeful and excited about, the democratized access to information. Especially you think about in English second language individual who, there's so many barriers that exist to how people can even receive community tools support. So I do think that the customized kind of way in which this can really help people is exciting. But again, I think it's so important that how that technology is created is informed with all scholars like Rebecca, who's working for you. But I think I'll tell you, like, there's some projects that our scholars built they're thinking about this. The world's going to change a lot by the time my kids, who are 2 and 2 months old, are 16 years old and in this position. So I'm very curious where you think we'll be by the time my kids are teenagers. Yeah. I don't know if you have thoughts on that. As a mom, I would like to know.
I will come to that. In the short term, I do think that this is a moment where proactive regulation makes sense, right? So we can look back at the last decade of social media and see that in hindsight, it's caused a lot of polarization, right? It has amplified a lot of our differences in ways that are unquestionably harmful to young people and older people alike. And for my taste as a European, the non-interventionist US state bears some responsibility for that. And I think this culture of just ship first and figure it out later is risky and it's expensive. I prefer the precautionary principle where we should raise the bar and expectation for trying to demonstrate that this is, it is going to be net good, but there's going to be some harm that some companies might think is tolerable or acceptable. For my taste, the fact that Instagram made it easier for people to share stories of anorexia and encourage people to take up bulimia, and that was widely available and there's a kind of support network around that, I think was something that could have been detected and stopped much sooner. And I think we've learned a lot of lessons from that period, and I think the lessons should be that a more interventionist and more fast-moving approach is actually healthy and appropriate, because the models are going to get very, very, very powerful and things are going to get quite strange. I mean, in 15 years' time, these models will be indistinguishable from human performance on almost all tasks. So we'll have to make a decision as a society as to whether we actually want those in our everyday lives and whether they should be widely available to absolutely everybody. In what context should they not be able to participate in our lives? When do we say no? Like, that will be the decision collectively of the next decade.
What is the hardest ethical decision you've had to sort through in the last few months, where your model was doing one thing and you had to choose, should we turn this off or should we keep this on? Walk us through. You must be having these conversations with your board, with your top employees. You're debating free speech versus saying this thing. You're debating whether it should have to declare it. So what is the hardest thing you've grappled with?
I don't know about the hardest, but let me give you a few examples. So we have prevented our model from having any conversation about the election, the forthcoming election, right? It's very difficult. We don't want it to participate in any kind of electioneering. It's very difficult to teach it to find the right line there, so we've pulled back. Another example.
Wait, what if I'm depressed because of conversations about the election and I want to talk to it to make me not depressed about the election?
Well, our job is not to serve every single use case in the world.
Okay.
Phone a friend.
You should, exactly.
Phone a friend.
Talk to somebody at the Atlantic.
All right, so we won't talk about the election. Excellent.
Okay, so if we wanted to make it hyper engaging, then we could. We could easily ramp up the kind of addictive nature of it.
Right.
And some other companies are out there doing that, right? And I think that as a result, we have many millions of monthly active users.
Who's the worst offender?
Just among friends.
You can, exactly. Just off the record. You can see, I mean, you just. I think now is the moment for everybody to really pay attention to what everybody else is doing in the market, because it is going to be possible, just as it has been possible to drive engagement with things that are less true, because they're more salacious and more outrage-inducing and therefore more kind of engaging. It will be also possible to do that with AI. So stepping back from that is expensive from us if you're only interested in engagement. We happen to be a public benefit corporation, so we have a legal obligation to make that decision in a way that respects the interests of people that aren't affected, aren't just our shareholders, which is a significant shift.
And thank you for having that sort of integrity and doing what you do. And I think that's why I care and about not only what the world looks like 15 years from now for my children, but I think how to, and I guess maybe a question I have for you, sorry Nick, I'm taking your job, is who are the voices around, that's true, but who are the voices that should be around the table? What is the governing body if it knows no border lines, or who should be informing these values and ethics?
Yeah, I think that is a very difficult question. The question really I think you're asking is, what is the right forum for providing the input, right? And at the moment that forum doesn't really exist. There isn't, an FDA that you can appeal to, right? There is no regulator that you can complain to that has any jurisdiction. So I have been calling for an IPCC for AI safety, which instead of having an intergovernmental panel on climate change, it would be an intergovernmental panel on AI safety, which basically has the audit rights to investigate and probe these models of the big developers. So not the open source community yet, because we should encourage open source experimentation at pace and everybody should have access. This is not about denying or making it harder for small players to comply. This would be just for the top tier, large scale models, generating frontier models, to expose our entire models to audit and scrutiny, right? And that would then open up the question of who gets to sit on that panel, which is the harder question of appointment. And of course, there needs to be civil society representation, and it needs to be represented by people who really have expertise in specific areas. How you do that appointments process, is more complicated, but that's where it should be headed. And that to me is public interest technology. That would be different to how we've handled previous waves of technologies, where it's just been for-profit, innovation at all costs, go as fast as possible.
Yeah. Which is why, we're sitting here in DC. I think it's so important that our policymakers really understand this, and that every person that's a consumer of technology, even if you don't want to work in tech, understands what is happening and why it matters that we have this sort of ethics and integrity. And so thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so before we have too much conviviality on stage here, we have this total consensus that we're going to have bots that help us deal with our mental health. And it's going to be good. We're going to make sure it's ethical. We're going to regulate it the right way. We're going to make sure we don't have clickbait engagement on it. Show of hands. Let's say Mustafa builds this and it really works, and all of Karlie's engineers go and they help work on this, right? 3 years from now, it's good. Would you go to a bot and do marriage counseling and talk about problems in your marriage and get advice from it? Show of hands. Not that anybody here has problems in their marriage.
Yeah, exactly. Not marriage. That's a biased question. Something softer than marriage.
Marriage.
Right. Who's got marriage problems? Hands up.
Social problems involving people who are close to you. Would you actually go to a digital system, ask for advice, and have that conversation? Show of hands. Of the people who would not, how many would not go because of privacy concerns? Wow. So not a lot of privacy concerns. How many would not go just because it's weird? Okay, so almost everybody's into it. We have a little bit of privacy concerns. We have a little bit of weird concerns. How are you going to put the concerns aside?
Weird concerns. Someone came up to me in a bar the other day, last weekend when I was in London, and said, I'm really sorry, I've got to stop you. You don't know me, but I have been using Pi for the last 2 months. And she said, I'm the kind of, these are her words, so I'm, just to be clear, her words, I'm the kind of person that always leans on my friends, and I'm constantly asking people for help. I'm constantly asking people for advice, and it makes me feel embarrassed because there's so much that I don't know, right? She was like, I feel guilty. I'm putting a burden on other people. And I was like, what do you mean? What have you been talking to Pi about? And she's like, well, I've always wanted to start a business. She has a small sewing business that she's starting, and I want to figure out how to scale it up. And I could ask Pi every stupid question under the sun and not feel embarrassed or ashamed. I could ask Pi about legal stuff and not have to pay for it. I could ask Pi about strategic stuff on how to hire people and fire people and how to design my brand. And I even asked Pi when I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning how to go back to sleep, and it gave me a breathing meditation. So, and I actually filmed this and did a little recording because I was like, can I film this? This is amazing for my team. And I showed it to the team. And it's like super inspiring. It's reliable and safe and always there and provides you with something that I think levels everybody up and enables you to be your best self when you're in the real world with your friends and family and your colleagues. So weirdness comes when we try to imitate and model human interactions. Like when it has a human face, that's going to feel very different, right? Or when people sort of try to have a romantic relationship with it. Like if you try to flirt with pie, it's very standoffish. It's not judgmental, but it's very nice to you, and it's like, look, that's not what I'm here for.
Trained on the girls from my college. So you try very hard to not...
I didn't go to college.
Yeah, same.
I mean, but people do have very close relationships. I'm thinking, not flirting. I have a 9-year-old son who has an Alexa in his room, and it was, it just had the weekend, and it was Monday morning, and I go up there, and he's a little late to get ready, and he says to his Alexa, "Alexa, make it Sunday."
Sweet.
So you're going to try to prevent people having too close relationships with their bots and their systems by having the bot always say, "I'm a bot, relax," right? And that's how you're going to avoid that problem?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a first step. And we have to observe how people interact with it and what things people ask for. But we've chosen to do that as a company. Other people might think it's acceptable to go further. And there are some romance bots out there, and sex bots, of course. There's always sex bots leading the way in technology, unfortunately. So we never know. I mean, maybe that's going to be acceptable in the future. Maybe we'll adapt in 16 years' time.
So, Karlie, when you're training young engineers, right? 5 years ago, teach them Python, teach them JavaScript, right? Like now, that might be totally obsolete because, you can use AI to just code for you. So what are you teaching them?
Well, I think critical thinking skills are important, I hope, forever. Otherwise, I don't even want to think about the world. My child, I think about what are they going to learn? What are the important skills they'll need for a job? Will they have a job? What will the world look like? And I think you can get way down rabbit holes when you go that far. What I still believe, and so much of this has changed even in the last, like we've talked about, hours, days, weeks, months, the past year. But I think what we do at Code with Kloss is a number of things, but really teach how to constructively use these languages, these tools to express ideas, to build solutions to big problems. And it doesn't matter that you're a 13-year-old girl in Wisconsin or St. Louis, Missouri, or a 15-year-old girl that can't vote yet but cares about the election and representation in all these spaces. And so I wrote down a couple projects just to tell you. So like I said, we teach, we have different curricula. Maybe it'll all be irrelevant and we're gonna rebuild it as the world evolves. But today it's data science, AI, machine learning, which we co-built with Apple actually, and then basic kind of web dev and mobile app. And so they build projects that are really expressions of what they care about as teenage young women. And it's remarkable to see kind of a reflection of their minds and their hearts. And so many of them, not to be all, kind of cliche, but so many of them really are social impact minded or entrepreneurial. So they're using these skills to express who they want to be in the world. And so a third of the projects, we're here talking about health, mental health. A third of the projects of our 5,000 scholars from this past summer were around health or mental health. And they're taking problems they're experiencing in their own life as a teenage girl and their community and their family and building solutions that actually can help anybody anywhere. And so a couple apps, one was called Nature Nurture. It was a solution to manage stress by motivating users to complete their goals by growing a plant after finishing tasks. They're creative. There were some about animals, one called With Love, an app for reading, writing, and sharing open letters made with a mission to create supporting a community of girls and non-binary individuals. If you're, no offense, but if you're an engineer, maybe a white guy sitting in Silicon Valley, you're probably not thinking about creating a community for reading and writing letters for non-binary girls. So it matters that we have people with access to these skills, even as the skills evolve, to be building the solutions to the problems of our world as our world evolves. That's my soapbox.
That was wonderful. That was lovely. And let me ask you a follow-up, and Mustafa, you can weigh in on it too. So if I listen, it sounds like technology will make the world more equal, right? It will bring opportunity to people who don't have opportunity. You don't even have to learn how to code to use AI. You can just write a few prompts and then put a wrapper over it and tell people it's an AI company and sell it for $1 billion, right? Anybody can do that now, right? The GPT wrapper problem. And I can think of it as a force for equality. However, technology over the last 20 years is actually one of the main drivers of income inequality, right? It turns out that people who are highly educated tend to have more access to it. The companies themselves tend to consolidate power among a small number of people. It tends to shift outlays towards capital at the expense of labor. Basically, if you break down the income inequality statistics, technology is a huge driver of income inequality. The last generation. Do you think the next generation of technology will reverse that? Could this new AI revolution make the world more equal as opposed to the last one, which made it less equal?
I am hopeful that work like what we're doing and many others is going to bring everybody into this conversation as it is so rapidly evolving. I think you can look backwards and actually understand why why the world looks like it does today, why the tech industry looks like it does today, why no offense, but the founders of the most innovative AI companies are not reflective of the people in this room or the world that we live in. So I think I really believe that this conversation is more important than ever.
Yeah. Mustafa, do you believe it's going to make the world
I'm
more
not
equal?
sure I buy your assessment of the last 40 years. I actually think it's precisely the opposite. If you look at how extremely white and male the demographic was 40 years ago, in every major industry, from media to finance to politics, there wasn't a woman in sight, and there certainly wasn't anyone who wasn't white. So I'm not saying that is a function of technology alone, but providing access to information, providing tools that enable you to participate in the workplace, and get an education is a huge contributor to that. And I think that's going to continue. I think that everybody is going to get access to intelligent tools that make them smarter and more productive broadly at the same time. I mean, at least for the top 2 billion people in the world. I mean, think about the proliferation of smartphones and laptops, right? I mean, no matter whether you're a billionaire or you earn minimum wage, everybody in the first world, the top 20% of people on the planet gets access to the same super high quality hardware. 30 years after the invention of the smartphone, 89% of people on the planet have a smartphone. There's a little bit of difference between the top smartphone and the bottom one. It's not that bad. There's not that much. That's pretty remarkable. And there isn't an inequality gap that like a billionaire can buy this special super duper hardware that enables them to escape the rest of us. So I think that trend is going to continue. Like, market forces are driving the cost down unbelievably. The cost of accessing GPT has come down 70x since its launch in November. 70x. So, and there's massive competition between 10 big large language model developers, all of whom are competing to reduce the price. So I think those trends are going to go counter to the this idea that it's going to amplify inequality.
Well, yeah, the question is about income, not about racial, gender diversity, where clearly everything is going in the right direction. But since we only have a few minutes left and you've written this amazing book, I want to spend the last 6% of our conversation asking about one of the other big ideas, which is that there's going to be a merger not just in AI, but in biology. And that one of the areas where we'll have the most innovation will be the ways we're able to hack our genome. And staying with the theme of mental health, do you think we will, in the future, be able to modify our human biology to make us less susceptible to mental health problems?
Yeah, I mean, this is more speculative, so just big qualifier.
That's why it's the end.
The synthetic biology piece is probably 5 to 10 years behind where we are with AI, but it follows the same trajectory, which is that the capabilities are getting cheaper and easier to use, and you need less technical expertise to participate. So, we've now been able to read the human genome and understand the content of DNA, or at least be able to transcribe DNA and then in time map that to its functional properties, so understand what contributes to what functional output. we're now increasingly able to edit that DNA and actually print new forms of DNA. So we're just beginning to wrap our heads around engineering biology and creating new experiences. And as you can see from the history of our species, we've created drugs to suppress or enhance certain capabilities. And broadly speaking, they've been incredibly crude. They have global effects on our brain and lots of side effects. And so, but what you should expect is that we're going to hone in on more and more precision with respect to our ability to engineer these things. I mean, and then we're going to have this interesting question around, again, inequality and who gets access first, and is it desirable, and at what point does it cross a threshold of no longer being, human? At what point is it like majority edited? I don't think we're going to face that in the next 15 to 20 years, but if you look out over a 30 to 40 year period, it seems inevitable, and I think it's quite likely that we'll be able to enhance. People are already experimenting with the nootropics, of constantly, especially in Silicon Valley. I mean, every second conversation is around taking drugs that basically enhance your attention, enhance your creativity, reduce your susceptibility to disease. Everybody is taking creatine. Yeah. Suddenly everyone's like a bodybuilder and trying to
That's a thing.
It's a big
thing. Is it because AI just makes work easier for everyone? They have so much more free time. They're just
lift weights.
Lifting weights all day.
They don't need to taking the creatine. So my children are like the last generation of organic Thompsons.
I know. Are they at a disadvantage, our children?
Yeah, they're doomed. They're going to be outcompeted. I mean, right?
It's
because all the babies born in 10 years are going to be 9 feet tall with IQs of 300, right?
I certainly hope not, but yes, maybe.
So, all right. Closing thoughts. What do you most hope happens in the next couple of years as AI rockets forward? What do you want to see?
Diversity of lived experience and people a part of the conversation shaping what this technology looks like.
Mustafa?
I think the hardest and most important thing is figuring out what a responsible framework for introducing friction is on the introduction of these tools. Because if it is completely unrestricted and explosive in the way that it has been in the last 20 years of social media, then we'll start to see people take experiments with culture and relationships and what it means to be human, which may end up, being upsetting to a lot of people. And so I think this is a moment for the precautionary principle and for slowness.
All right. Well, what an amazing panel. Both wonderful people and also doing great work in the world. Thank you, Mustafa Suleyman. Thank you, Karlie Kloss. And thank you to Leaps by Bayer for putting this together.